Our first talk is put together by Dr. Worrell, who is going to tell us about the history of neuromodulation before the year 2000 here at Mayo. Obviously, Dr. Worrell is, he's already spoken. Rob introduced him. But since I get to introduce him here, I just want to take a moment to thank him for the extremely positive role he's had in developing neuromodulation at Mayo. I think many of us have benefited by our interactions with him over the years. I actually first knew of him purely as a scientist before I found out he was a physician when we were looking at intracranial electrophysiology data back in 2006 and 7, and we had him come and speak at a session that we had in Whistler, and he's a uniquely impressive individual. He's a doctorate in physics before he became a physician, and what I can tell you is that neuromodulation as it currently is at Mayo, the reason why I think, and I do think that particularly for epilepsy, this is really the best place in the world for neuromodulation, and that really is due to Greg. So he's going to tell us about the history of folks who came before and have long since retired. So thanks, Greg.
All right. Thanks for the kind introduction, Kai. Yeah, so this was not totally last minute, but we did have a different speaker. But now you've got me. I'm going to get, this is my bias. This is from a little bit of the perspective of a physicist's perspective of brain stimulation. So, it's going to start with the Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell. And of course, there's an ancient history for electrical stimulation, and an earlier history, Galvani and Volta, the Volta pile. That was the first battery. So really critical technology that enabled biology, biological science, neuroscience. But it was really this that gave the footing from which all things came. And that is in four equations, all of electromagnetism. So from that comes Bluetooth, wireless streaming. From that comes everything. Richard Feynman, famous physicist, well known, said, from the perspective of history far in the future, this will be a pinnacle, if not the pinnacle of all the technological advances that have occurred. Now, of course, then with that science came a lot of biology in Germany. Hitzig and Fritz, with a battery, could do galvanic stimulation. So mapping cortex became an enormous advance in science. And then Krauss, who was an anatomist in Germany, Horsley, a British neurosurgeon, really, I think I think he's seen as the first epilepsy neurosurgeon. And then Barlow in Cincinnati, a woman that had a cranial defect, he stimulated the brain. This culminated in Penfield and Jasper, but a few other things happened in between. World War II, the movement of European science to the US, and there are some very notable people. One is Johnny von Neumann. That's the first computer, the ENIAC computer, really fundamental to where we are today. And then this book, a famous book, it gave Kai his lab's name, that coined the word cybernetics. It was a new word. Norbert Wiener, famous mathematician. And they're already thinking about things, control and communication in the animal and the machine. It sounds like a really modern idea. It's 1948. And as I said, this really culminated with the American neurosurgeon who spent all of his time in Canada, but born in America. I thought I could get a little rise from that. Wilder, Penfield. And what I love about this Jasper, born in Washington, but this is like just the pinnacle of that collaborative neurophysiologist, neurosurgery team that, you know, created the homunculus and everything, not everything, but a lot of what we know, and certainly a lot of what we knew about the brain at that time. 1954. Now there was a little bit of a dark period, crazy things. So there was and I won't talk about it, but a famous program, the CIA MK Ultra program, mind control, hot topic, and Jose Delgado, and this is a book, Physical Control of the Mind. He was at Yale. Did quite a showman, apparently. So he implanted a bull in the amygdala. He's got a radio transmitter that he's holding here. The bull's implanted. He's wirelessly controlling the bull. Now that's not enough just to, you know, have an animal and try and control it. You got to go to Madrid, have a bullfighting arena, get the cape. That's Jose Delgado right there. And you can see the antenna on his radio controller. So this was published in the New York Times in 1970. So as the bull's charging to him, he stops the bull. And it's kind of a useless experiment, of course. But yeah, things can go sideways. And they went further sideways. So this is Robert Heath. He was at Tulane. He was, and my neurosurgery friends always tell me, you know, these guys were neurologists. They weren't neurosurgeons. They always want to point out that Delgado, neurologist. Robert Heath, neurologist, psychiatrist. But he was an interesting program at Tulane, combined psychiatry and neurology program. He was the chair of that department and worked on, probably did the first brain stimulation for epilepsy. So implanting a wide range of people, externalized leads, a battery pack, and wrote about electrical self-stimulation of the brain and man. So people, if given a stimulator that they could control, and if the electrodes are in nucleus accumbens or median forebrain bundle, yeah, sometimes it feels good. So he demonstrated this. Did a number of studies in people with schizophrenia. The consenting process for that, you know, it's in the window of, well, I even think at the time, you know, these were very, very questionable studies. But it actually got worse. The pinnacle was the septal area stimulation to convert a homosexual into a heterosexual male. So there was a really crazy period. I think it's good to know that history as technologies develop. All technologies needs to be used wisely. This is a really interesting book by Lone Frank, Pleasure Shock, about Robert Heath. So that's a little bit of the milieu at that time, late 40s, 50s, and 60s. There were other things happening. The engineers were at work. So this is the first pacemaker. And you see, the whole device is a battery, basically. So engineers understand that. And there are a few leads coming off of it. So this is Wilson Greatbatch, who had a very successful company, Greatbatch, that licensed technology from the creator of Medtronic, Earl Bakken, and this became a really standard therapy of implantable devices for cardiac. And many of the first uses in neurology, neurosurgery, were using these devices designed for the heart. Now another thing happened. So the physicists rise again. The transistor. So Shockley, who has a lot of problems himself that we won't go into, but won the Nobel Prize for the transistor. And out of Shockley transistor, I was at NeuroPace last year, and so there's an area in Mountain View, which was the first building where Shockley's semiconductor company was started. And out of that company, Shockley apparently was a terrible manager. Everyone, this may be too strong, everyone hated him. So out of Shockley came the traitorous eight. And so these were people, the company blew up, they left. And they started small companies that led to companies like Intel. And if you look from this traitorous eight, it basically is a connection to all the companies, AMD, Intel, of course. Moore is in there, Noyce is in there, Moore from Moore's Law. So right around this time, 50s, 60, there's really a confluence of technology, biology, and what's happening at the Mayo Clinic at that time. Reginald Bickford was the first director of the EEG lab. Ross Miller is a neurosurgeon. And they were doing very modern things, looking at neurosurgical techniques and application of depth electrode encephalography, doing brain stimulation. This appeared in 1953 in the proceedings of the Mayo Clinic. There was a lot of interest in cerebellar stimulation. Jack Grabo, Michael Ebersol. Actually, these guys were around when I first came here. I mean, they were very much at the end of their career. But they had animal models of cerebellar stimulation. Mike Ebersol was a neurosurgeon. Jack Grabo, an epileptologist. So that's really the milieu, probably the biggest impact Mayo Clinic had. And in this meeting, we haven't talked about education. But in that milieu of the 70s and those people just mentioned, there was this guy, I.S. Cooper. He was a neurosurgery resident. So he trained here. This is a fantastic, fantastic book. And he talks about his time here. He left and really did most or many of the initial studies, more systematic studies of brain stimulation for epilepsy, movement disorders, and an enormous impact on the field. Just as an example, in the right environment, you train people too, and they leave, and it goes beyond what happens at the origin institution. So then I'm just going to wrap up with this. From that perspective, we didn't have much of opportunity to have an ethicist here. Of course, we work very closely with the ethicist, Richard Sharp, but it's a very important lens through which, as Tim had it, I thought that was beautiful. Kind of looked like it had been added on at the last minute, though. Ethical foundation in your circle. But that's why it can't be added on at the end. It really has to be the foundation, because as technology expands, many things are possible, but not all things should be done, right? So with that, I'll finish up. Thanks.